Retail is buzzing right now over the stablecoin bill, and it's easy to see why. Over on Polymarket, users are predicting an 89% chance that the Stablecoin Bill Genius Act will become law by 2025. But here's the big question no one seems to be asking. What does this mean for stablecoins like Tether? For years, we've heard all the doom and gloom predictions about Tether. It's going to collapse. It'll implode and take the entire crypto market down with it. Sounds dramatic, right? These warnings have been floating around for nearly a decade, yet nothing major has happened. Tether is still here, standing strong. So here's the big question. What's going to happen with Tether? It's interesting because Tether has become one of the largest holders of US Treasuries. And if something were to go wrong with them, it could spell trouble for the US economy. Kind of a big deal, right? Now, it makes you wonder, did Tether take steps to protect themselves? Was this all part of their plan? In this video, I'll dive into all things Tether and break it down for you. Plus, we'll take a closer look at RealESD, Ripple, and of course, XRP. All right, let's dive in. First up, let's talk about what ROUSD has been up to. Huge shout out to Ben Grossman for this one. Here's the scoop. Ripple's team is crushing it with the ROUSD stablecoin closing in on 500 million in TVL. Pretty awesome, right? But the big news here is that Ondo Finance just brought their short-term US Treasury Fund, OUSG, for the XRP ledger. And here's the best part. They're using ROUSD for all the minting and redemption process. That's a game changer. Think about it. Ondo Finance is a major player, and now ROUSD and the XRP ledger are directly tied into some serious action. Let's talk about ROUSD for a second. Most of 362.8 million to be exact is on Ethereum. Meanwhile, 37.4 million is on the XRP ledger. But here's the interesting part. The majority of holders, 29.4K of them, are actually on the XRP ledger compared to just 3,000 on Ethereum. Crazy, right? So what's going on here? For me, the real focus is on ROUSD's market cap and monthly transfer volume. These numbers give us a glimpse into how far ROUSD has come and how successful it's becoming. ROUSD has been making waves lately with over 400 million in market cap, up 41.43% in the past 30 days. On top of that, its monthly transfer volume has hit an impressive 2.5 billion, climbing nearly 50% in just a month. Pretty exciting, right? If we take a closer look at the transfer activity, it's clear that ROUSD is seeing some serious momentum. Now, could this be tied to Ripple's big moves like developments with the XRP ledger and partnerships with players like Ondo? Totally possible. But here's the interesting part. Most of this action seems to be happening on Ethereum. So are we starting to see ROUSD being used more in DeFi pools and Ethereum-based protocols? That could definitely be what's driving this surge. It's still a bit tricky to say for sure, but we do know one thing. This 400 million figure isn't accurate. RWA.mz isn't tracking it correctly. If we check ROUSD on CoinMarketCap, it's actually sitting closer to 430 million, which shows it's growing much faster than we initially thought. In fact, they just minted an additional 13 million ROUSD recently. When we take a look at USD stablecoins and their rankings, ROUSD is climbing the list pretty quickly. It makes you wonder, how long will it take for ROUSD to hit 500 million? And from there, could it reach 1 billion? I think this is all moving a lot faster than most people realize. When we talk about ROUSD, the big question that comes up is, what about XRP and the XRPL? The XRP ledger has been showing some exciting growth in the stablecoin market and RWA, real world asset value. Right now, ROUSD is the only stablecoin being tracked on the XRP ledger. But here's the interesting part. When will the others start getting tracked too? We've just seen 5 more stablecoins added to the XRP ledger, including USDC, which is a big deal. Personally, I'm really excited about this because stablecoins are such a game changer. If we zoom out for a second and think about Circle and USDC, there's a staggering 59 billion in USDC out there right now. And when you look at the monthly transfer volume for USDC, it's clear there's massive potential here. The transfer volume for USDC is absolutely massive, almost 1 trillion in monthly transfers. That said, it's actually down by 4.74% right now. Still, when we take a closer look, we can see some key metrics like the number of holders, monthly active addresses, the market cap, and even the networks where USDC is listed. Interestingly, most of the USDC out there is currently on Ethereum. Why is that? Well, Ethereum has become the go-to home for stablecoins. And a big reason is its dominance in the DeFi space. With so many DeFi protocols running on Ethereum, it's no surprise that it's the top choice for stablecoins like USDC. I really think we'll start seeing more action once the EVM sidechains go live on networks like the XRP ledger. That's when I expect to see more stablecoins flowing into these networks, including the XRP ledger itself, which is super exciting. That said, I do wonder how quickly XRP will climb the ranks, especially when you look at the numbers. Most of these networks currently hold less than $100 million in USDC. And right now, the XRP ledger has about $37,400,000 tied to ROA. Let's break this down. If we think about it, this could easily push it higher on the list above Aptos, CeLo, ZK Sync Era, Near, and even Mantra. The USDC integration on the XRP ledger is super exciting too. It opens up so many possibilities for DeFi payments and even institutional DeFi. But let's shift gears and talk about Tether for a moment because, wow, it's a powerhouse. We're talking about 150 billion tied to it. When it comes to stablecoins, Tether is king. Just look at the numbers. Over 1 trillion in monthly transfer volume, 14 plus million active addresses, and nearly 102 million holders. That's huge. Most of Tether's supply runs on Tron, with Ethereum right behind it. These two networks dominate when it comes to Tether activity. Of course, Tether has always been surrounded by rumors. Some people call it a scam or even a Ponzi scheme connected to Bitcoin. Nobody has ever fully proven this, but the biggest complaint people have with Tether is about its one-to-one backing. Critics constantly call out Tether for not providing a completely clear and transparent audit. They've been promising one for years, but we still haven't seen it. What's interesting, though, is that Anthony Pompliano recently hosted Tether's CEO on his channel for an interview, and the conversation was pretty eye-opening. The CEO mentioned that he believes Tether is worth a staggering $2 trillion. Sounds wild, right? But here's the kicker. Tether is apparently the most profitable company per employee in human history. The interview covered a lot of ground, and it was fascinating to hear the CEO's perspective. It's definitely worth checking out if you're curious about what he had to say. So here's the thing. There have been some interesting conversations popping up about Tether lately. Let's start with a comment from Jacob King. All Bitcoin maxis know deep down that Tether is the greatest scam in history. Pompliano used to call it out, but now Tether is one of the investors in his podcast and fund. Tether is buying out the crypto voices to deceive the public. Some pretty strong words, right? The takeaway here is that there's been ongoing skepticism about Tether, with people questioning how solid their one-to-one backing really is. This isn't new either. Back in 2017, people were already raising eyebrows. They wanted more transparency, asking, where's the breakdown of this one-to-one backing? And honestly, that's a fair question we still don't have answers to. It's hard to believe it's been almost 10 years now. Recently, something pretty surprising happened. The CEO even sat down on Squawk Box to talk about the Senate passing the Genius Act. Riz XRP, a member of the XRP community, shared a few interesting clips about it. On another note, have you noticed how Tether's CEO always comes across as a bit shady? Definitely doesn't feel as transparent as USDC or ROOSD. What do you think? Take a look at this.
I got a different question. We always talk about just the dollar. And this goes to maybe the Treasury issue, but just the dollar, the primacy of the dollar. And there are folks in this White House who talk about how they love crypto, but they also love the dollar. Do you think that ultimately when it's Bitcoin or crypto more broadly is ultimately going to have a benefit to the dollar long term or undermines the dollar? And given that I don't think you're an American, you may not have a stake in this argument.
Well, I have a stake in the interest of stability for all the emerging markets where we operate, right? So definitely I know that there are concerns on the increase of debt of the United States, but think about the fact that the United States are by far still the safest country when it comes to, their national currency and your national currency, right? So if you compare, everything is relative in life. Think about Argentina, think about Brazil or Turkey and Vietnam and so on, and Nigeria. So by far, the US dollar is the safest fiat currency in the world. And I think that stable coins that were born through crypto are the living proof that actually a combination between Bitcoin. I would not say crypto in general. I love Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is completely different than crypto and the rest of crypto. So between Bitcoin and stablecoins, they will make America stronger. And that, I think, is the main point of this administration. With stablecoins, we are bringing the US dollar to 420 million people around emerging markets, developing countries, and at an unprecedented pace. We grow by 30 million new wallets per quarter. We are the biggest factor in the expansion of the US dollar hegemony. So that is something very important, apart from buying back the US Treasury. And by the way, Tether invested in the last 3 years back around $5 billion in the US. So we are, I think, one of the biggest promoters of the United States and the United States dollar. Plus, on top of that, we use Bitcoin as a way to create a stronger savings account for and explain how that could be beneficial also for Americans. In the end, it's like Bitcoin is the new gold and is understood by people as an edge. I'm not saying that you should have 100% of your portfolio maybe in Bitcoin, but definitely is a good option to have in your portfolio.
I don't necessarily think it's a case of using Tether for offshore transactions and Circle for onshore ones. What we're really looking at here is how Tether compares to USDC and ROUSD. And honestly, it doesn't quite stack up. The biggest difference comes down to clarity and transparency. With USDC and ROUSD, we get regular detailed reports every month. Both are fully audited, so you know exactly where things stand. Fortunately, Tether doesn't offer that same level of transparency, and that's a key factor to consider. The big news we're keeping an eye on is the New York Department of Financial Services approving ROUSD and USDC. Huge milestones for the industry. This is why audits are such a big deal, right? CNBC even highlights how important they are for building trust and the solid rails in the system. Pretty exciting stuff. Check it out.
Focus on just the risks in the system, because actually now as this business is really growing, we were speaking to the CEO of Tether before. Obviously, people have been demanding more transparency from that company, for example, for a long time. Where are the risks in the system, to the extent there are some that we should be thinking and concerned about, if at all?
Well, look, I think some of the risks exist in the same banking system, right? Let's have audits. If you talk about USDC, which is a large stable coin, after Tether, it's the second largest market cap. I mean, you're talking about two issuers, Coinbase and Circle. Those are public companies. They're audited by Big Four accounting firms. So let's see, and if companies are going to stay private, let's see the audits happen every year. And I think, I'm not sure about Tether, but I do believe they have a board. Do they have an audit and risk committee? I'm not sure. You'd have to, when you have Paulo on next time, you'll have to ask those questions. And those are the questions I would be asking. But I know with respect to USDC, I've been familiar with Circle and with Coinbase for a long time. And, when I served on the board of Coinbase, I saw those audit reports, and I saw the procedures and processes in place. And again, I think that's where not all stablecoins, and not all stablecoins are created equal. I can really speak mostly to USDC, given my history and experience, but there are other great stablecoins out there. And I know that others are in the works too. Paxos has one also, for example. And we'll see others emerge, I suspect. A lot of people talk about the market opportunity, Andrew, of just yours. But as I mentioned, there's the orchestration layer, also plays an important role. Kind of think of it as Grand Central Station, the rails. That's a really important piece of this all too. And what kind of companies are those? I mean, we saw Stripe just acquire Bridge for $1 billion. And Bridge is not the only game in town, right? We also have, for example, BVNK. That's another orchestrator for the stablecoin space. And I think the reason that you're seeing a lot of new entrants is because the market opportunity is so big.
This whole thing really surprises me. We're on national television and people are still saying, hey, you should ask Tether these questions. What blows my mind is that we're finally getting legislation and clarity around stablecoins, yet these same questions about Tether are still coming up. And here's the tricky part. These questions should have been asked years ago, like 5 or even 10 years back, when Tether was just starting to gain traction in crypto. But now it's a massive stable coin and the conversation feels way overdue. Some say it's a 2 trillion business. Others point out that Tether is way bigger than Circle, and Circle just went public. Ryan from Bankless even shared an interesting post asking, is Tether the world's most valuable company? Here's why. Tether made a jaw-dropping $13.7 billion in profit last year, and according to their CEO, profits are expected to be even higher this year. Now, consider this. Circle is trading at a 270x earnings multiple. If we apply that same multiple to Tether, we're looking at a 3.7 trillion valuation. That's bigger than Microsoft, Nvidia, and Apple. In fact, it would make Tether the most valuable company in the world. But here's the twist. While this valuation sounds massive, it can also be a ticking time bomb as new legislation starts to take shape. Did you hear the news? Mika over in the EU has blacklisted Tether, and now we're seeing stablecoin legislation coming to the US. With both the US and EU markets potentially cutting off Tether, it really raises the question, what's next for USDT? How will this impact Tether and the market as a whole? These are big unknowns, and it's something we should all be preparing for, especially now with stablecoin legislation possibly arriving in the next 6 months, or maybe even sooner, as some predict it could happen within the next month. This is definitely a time to stay informed and ready for change. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more free content. Appreciate you all, and see you next time. Peace.